I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, is it okay for a woman to hold off on marriage to pursue other goals? We look at the shift in the marriage tradition in two of the world's largest economies, India and China. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, from a Western perspective, this idea that a woman is too old at age 25 and is somehow a leftover is madness. But there are women all around the world who deal with this every day.
Definitely, and we're finding that across our stream community, which is global, they're dealing with these same issues. We got a tweet from India, where it's common, Morocco, and this last one, South Korea, where Jaiho says, in South Korea, 20s and 30s is called a generation, give up three things, which are romance, get the job, and marriage. Now, for those of you at home, we want to know what happens in your community as well, so join the conversation by using the hashtag AJStream.
Joining us in the studio today is Joy Chen, author of the book Do Not Marry Before Age 30. Her book aims to inspire Chinese women to ignore the traditional pressure to get married and follow their dreams. Joy herself is a first-generation Chinese American. She's also served as the deputy mayor of Los Angeles when she was just 31 years old. Joy, welcome to the stream.
Thank you for having me.
If there's anybody who embodies an ambitious woman, it's a woman who is deputy mayor at age 31. We've got a panel of guests also in our Google Plus Hangout today. You too can join a future Hangout by going to the Google Plus page and adding the stream to your circles.
Hi, my name is Mikey from Southgate, California. I love being a part of the World Dialogue, and that's why you're going to find me in the stream.
China and India are the fastest growing economies in the world, and that means a growing middle class. And as a result, more women are finding opportunities that see them putting off marriage in pursuit of other goals. In India, marriage is deeply integrated with culture and religion. Traditionally, arranged marriages were a means of keeping upper caste families strong. If a woman remains unmarried, she's considered a spinster and a burden on her family. In China, if a woman isn't married by age 27, she's known as a shengnu, or a leftover woman. That actually became an official Chinese term in 2007. According to the country's feminist agency, that's right, I said feminist agency, listen to this. Women, as they age, are worth less and less. So by the time they get their MA or their PhD, they are already old, like yellowed pearls. But minds, at least of the young, may be changing. Here's a music video that went viral in China on the popular site Youku. It's called No Car, No House. The message, ignore the pressure and wait for the right man to come along. Also joining us today via Skype is Ira Trivedi. She is a best-selling author of several books, including India in Love, Love, Sexuality, and Marriage in 21st Century India. Ira, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Joy, I want to start with you. What's inspiring this new generation? Why now? What's changed?
Well, I think principally women's education. So business school enrollment in the United States is rising because of women from China. So women from China are among the most educated people in the world. And I think that with that education comes new dreams. Women, on one hand, have 5,000 years of cultural pressure weighing down on their shoulders, telling them what a woman's role is, to be a wife and to be a mother. And on the other hand, women have all these new dreams. So I think right now, this whole leftover woman stigma is just at the middle of that clash between old and new.
Speaking of that clash of old and new, Ira, these women are really caught in this cross current, right? Trying to please the old guard and conform somewhat to old traditions and old cultures, yet pursue these new paths. How do they navigate that? That's got to be so incredibly challenging.
Absolutely. It's a very, very difficult environment for young women in India. And I think especially newly married young women too, because they have to juggle so much. It's, taking care of the mother-in-law, making sure you're cooking a dinner, but at the same time, you have a job, you have to take care of the children. So in fact, a recent survey showed that Indian women are some of the most stressed out in the world, because I think because of this, because there's so much of both worlds for them to handle, because we haven't yet crossed over. we're still, in somewhere in between. And there's bound to be a lot of tension when a change like this happens. I definitely feel that there's a revolution that's happening in India right now, and women are really at the crux of this.
Well, Ira, there's a tweet here from an Indian man. Akash says, here in India, marriage is seen as a prerequisite for social acceptance, and those who don't, even men, are seen with askance eyes. Would you agree with that? Or can you elaborate on that feeling of...
I think Akash is correct in some ways. Marriage is deeply ingrained in India, in Indian religion, really. And that's why it'll be it's very difficult to change those views despite women coming to the workplace. But also India, there's a very, very big emphasis on education. So we have a little bit of both. So Akash is right, but I do think that things are slowly changing. I mean, many of the young people who I meet today, and I lecture in colleges across this country, the number one thing they say is that, hey, I need to make sure that my career is on track because I don't want to end up in a trash can in 5 years. And I'm quoting someone who I recently met who says that for me, career is the number one thing and marriage comes later. And this I'm hearing not just from young men, but also from young women. They both say this. So I do think that whereas Akash is perhaps of the old guard, I think there's an entire generation of young people in their early 20s who are not looking at things this way anymore.
Joy, how does this square with what you're seeing happen with young women in China?
Well, I think that it's so interesting to hear Ira talk about what's going on in India, because I think that in China, on one hand, you see young women going out and pursuing an education. And in fact, from the time they're very small, they've been encouraged by their parents to just focus on their studies, don't talk about boyfriends, don't date anybody. They're told by their parents, do not date through college. But then as soon as they hit their first job, immediately there's this push the other way and say, well, don't be too smart, girls. You don't want to scare the guys. And don't focus too much on your careers because you don't want to be unattractive to men. And so I think that women are experiencing a kind of whiplash effect.
It's got to be incredibly confusing, right? Yeah,
well,
you're
exactly.
pushed so hard one direction until your mid-20s.
Just to add to what Joy said, in fact, when I was researching marriage brokers for my book, the marriage brokers, who look at thousands, perhaps, sometimes millions across all these marriage brokers of young people, they said the very same thing, that we find that the women that we get today in our, to apply to our agencies, they're much more highly educated than men. So we actually find there's for women to find men now is very difficult because they're more educated. A 25-year-old woman is more educated than the standard 25-year-old man.
And isn't it fairly typical, Ira, in India that not all men, but typically men marry down, women marry up?
Absolutely.
So if an A man is marrying a B woman, who's
that's
the...
what's been happening for generations and centuries in this country.
So if the A man is marrying the B woman, who's left for the A woman?
Exactly. So the people who are actually, and sort of science prove this, and there's lots of social scientists who studied this, that in hypergamy, the two groups that get left behind are educated women and very poor men. So these are the two groups of people who really have nowhere to go, and that's what we're seeing in India today. I mean, that's the all the old guard, as I call them. People say the same thing, that if you're a highly educated woman or a very poor man, you're not going to find anyone.
Well, let's get the view from our Google Plus Hangout, a person in India. Shehla is an activist speaking to us from New Delhi. And Shehla, you told our producer something a little bit earlier that resonated with me. Particularly, you said, as long as you're in a group of friends who are all unmarried around the same age, you're safe. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so what I basically said was this is some sort of a support group. If your closest friends are unmarried, you can make a case for yourself in front of your parents, saying that, oh, my best friend, she's still unmarried, mama, look at her. She'll now pursue an MBA, or she'll continue to work for 2 more years, so why can't I? So if you lose that support group, that is if your best friends get married, then it's much more difficult to make that case. And I really find what Akash said very true, because like he said, it has got something to do with social acceptance. So even after, let's say, if you're not married till 35, all your friends will be having kids by then. And those kids would be studying in 2nd and 3rd grades, and then you won't have anyone to hang out with. So that's a real, that's the real problem in India.
I think
Most of your friends will be having kids by 35.
I think it's so interesting what we're hearing about the women in India, that there are some women who say, I want to focus on my career first, and then I want to think about marriage later. And that there are these kinds of support groups among women when they find other peers that want to do the same thing, they can give each other power. I think that in China, we find very few women who say consciously, I want to focus on my career first. Yeah. I just feel like women right now are so buried under the pressure. There's never been a women's liberation movement in China. And so I think that women feel very much alone in dealing with this pressure that they deal with from their families, from the people in their workplace, from all of their friends to hurry up and get married. And there's very little set place of safety or support group.
Well, they're feeling it from the government too. I mean, we've got on my computer here is a quote from an article about leftover women in China, and in it, the gender experts are explaining how the government has literally targeted these women. It says, ever since 2007, the state media have aggressively disseminated this term, basically stigmatizing leftover women, stigmatizing educated women over the age of 27 or 30 who are still single.
On that point, though, I feel like the government is speaking out of two sides of its mouths, because on one hand, it's been promoting this leftover women stigma. On the other hand, the government allowed the publication of my book. And if anything, they've been actively promoting the book on all of the government media, on their TV, People's Daily Online. If they had any problem with the book, they would have shut it down. And so I find it very strange. I mean, my friends ask me, Joy, are you going to get put in jail when you go to China? Are you going to be asked to tea, which is a euphemism for being taken off to jail and disappeared. But to the contrary, I haven't been asked to tea. I also haven't been feted. They've basically not talked to me. But they're out there allowing me to appear on People's Daily Online. And
do they perceive you as an outsider?
Again, it's very strange. The All Women's China Foundation, which is supposedly the feminist agency, they just named me Woman of the Year for 2012 based on this book. And so I don't think the government has a very clear policy. I think that in general, the government has a lot of problems on its hands, and the government in general wants women to be freer and happier, which is what my book is about. They have enough trouble dealing with, corruption, air pollution, all kinds of other issues. I think that if they can let women be happy, they would rather women be happy. I think that all this talk about leftover women is more of cultural stigma that people in government are carelessly continuing, rather than this being an active policy.
Is there a competitive angle to this, though? Chinese are very, very competitive. Chinese men are incredibly competitive, and now you have these very bright young women who are competing for the same jobs as the men. The government is predominantly controlled by men. Is there any element of competition you see coming into this?
Well, this whole thing about men and women is very interesting, because actually men are the ones who are left over in China. Because of the one-child policy, there's 120 men for every 100 women of marrying age due to, aborting of female fetuses, which is completely different, a different matter.
And it's so we've covered here.
There you go. Okay, so men are left over, but women are the ones who are so stigmatized for being left over.
Well, we're getting chiming in from people all over the world. Again, Gabriela says there's pressure on women to marry is prevalent in many cultures. In Mexican culture, it's the only acceptable way to leave the house. And one more tweet from DBC who says, why can't a woman pursue both career and marriage simultaneously? Men do it, and women always outperform men at similar tasks. But Lisa, a little bit earlier you mentioned government, and that's something we were talking about. I want to get the view from Singapore. I want to go to our Google Plus Hangout and speak to Charlene. Charlene Shepherdson is an artist and poet speaking to us from Singapore. Can you tell us what the government is doing there?
Well, I think the situation in Singapore is a little bit different, because we've been it's a little bit different because as much as the children, the girls here are educated and they're actually encouraged to take on their MBAs, to go on and to take their doctorates, they're also trying to get them to marry sooner, and they realize that the more educated you get the females to be, the longer they delay the marriage. And because of that, you have the low birth rates. So recently in December, we have this Department of Social Development Network, and it's basically trying to matchmake the different, like the females and the males together through like social interest groups, because the problem we're finding is that everyone's working so hard, you have no time to find a partner. So they're trying to do things like getting them to interact a bit more and hopefully encourage marriage at the same time.
This is government matchmaking.
Yes, well, I think that in Singapore, in China, and in many of these cultures, there's just much more social intervention by the government into society than we're used to. Actually, for all through the Mao years in China, people weren't allowed to stay single. The government forced you to get married, and they would give you somebody to marry if you didn't have somebody to marry. So, so I think this is just part of the, these cultures in these more authoritarian areas that we're not used to here in the United States, for sure.
So, Ira, we've got grandparents, we've got parents doing matchmaking, we've got the government doing matchmaking. What about love? Where does the role of love come into this?
I was just sort of going to hop in right here, and I was going to say, I think the reason, Joy's speaking a lot about leftover women, and I think what's happening, I think this is actually a big difference between India and China. In my book, I'm sort of looking at sort of the sexual revolution and the love revolution, both of these countries. And I think the main difference is, and Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in India, in urban India, in metro, the metro cities, there's still a very prevalent culture of arranged marriage. So even if you're a highly educated woman, you will find someone because you have so many people looking for you. So it's very rare here that, it's that you'll be left behind because your parents, matchmakers, online websites, there's such a culture still of arranged marriage, though the big change in the past decade has been a shift towards love. And that's why fundamentally the culture is changing. So I think, 2 points here is that today in India, in all societies, in all segments of society, arranged marriage is still very prevalent, but it is slowly changing. And young people today want to marry for love.
I think this question about love is so interesting because as I wrote in my book, I think that, for 5,000 years, we never really talked much about love in Chinese culture.
Yeah.
Marriage and family were born out of responsibility. So we talked about the wife's responsibility to the husband, the parents' responsibility to the children. That's what the whole Confucian system is all about. All human relationships are based on responsibility. So love is actually a relatively new idea in Chinese society, but suddenly we talk about it all the time. There's all kinds of reality dating shows in China now, and suddenly everyone wants to find true love. But I think that without this kind of tradition of it, the upper generations in society is still telling young women today, hurry up, and just marry anybody.
Yeah.
Marry for the sake of marriage. And young women are saying, but wait a minute, I would like to find true love.
That's not too much to ask.
I
On
don't think
YouTube,
so.
there is an Indian-Canadian woman who does these really funny sketches about how her mother pressures her to get married. Take a look at this.
चुप कर ओके तू बड़ी हो गया तेरा ब्याह कर देना आज मुंडा आने लगा तन्नू देखन तू चुप करके तैयार हो जा ओके No, there's nothing you can do that's going to make me meet this guy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So, Joy, this comedian is a first-generation Indian-Canadian, not unlike you, being a first-generation Chinese-American. How are the cultural influences translated when you have immigrant parents? Do they ease up? Do they sort of become more of the American environment in your case? Or does it actually become stronger because they're trying to hold on to the traditions?
Well, actually, I think that in the case of my own family and many of the Chinese Americans that I speak with, parents sometimes get more conservative when they're here because they don't have sort of the moderating influences of being connected to the culture around them. And many of them live in very isolated Chinese American communities here and only socialize with each other. And so it's almost like a time warp that they still hold on to many of the values and attitudes that they came here with in the 1950s and 60s.
And we're talking about families and the role they play. We got a video comment from a member of our community in India. Have a listen.
Great.
Do accept the fact that their daughter wants to get married at a later age, but I feel it's the grandparents and of that generation who don't accept it so much, because they get all emotional that they want to see their great-grandchildren, etc., etc. When it comes to what kind of a person she will get, is it difficult? Definitely, to an extent I feel it is, because she needs someone who understands her at that age, and there are different needs. And also the fear is she might get a widower or someone who's already been married and has children, which is difficult for Indians to accept.
So Helen Gao in our Google Plus Hangout, that was the view from India. You are, of course, are in Beijing. We have a minute to go, but I'd like the view from where you are. Looks like you might need to unmute. Go ahead.
Yes. So there's one thing that Joy was saying that be true for me is that there's never a feminist movement in China. Before during the Mao era, you hear people say women can do the same thing that men can do, and that was the time when you can say there's gender equality in China. But right now that wave of gender equality has already worn off. So right now you have people thinking in the old ways in which people think women shouldn't be working too much, and then they should be taking care of the family. So that's one of the reasons why for women who want to pursue a career are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to speak their mind because there's so much pressure outside telling them not to do so.
Social stigma.
That's one.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this conversation in our post show, but before we go, we want to get to Malika, who's got a few other leads that we're following.
We all love search engines, but some users say Facebook has crossed a line. UK blogger Tom Scott is one of the first to try out Facebook's new graph search and use Tumblr to post his results, which some may find a little unsettling. In one example, he shows how anyone can log onto Facebook and combine search terms to get results like this. A list of family members of people who live in China and like the outlawed spiritual movement, Falun Gong. Another example shows Muslim men living in Tehran who list themselves as being interested in other men. When Darshan on Twitter explains the worrying implications, in an ideal world, gay men in Iran should be able to safely say so on Facebook, but graph search makes it too easy to target them. Jesse, meanwhile, calls it a sobering reminder to review the public information on your Facebook profile. Now on to our next lead. Is the New York City Police Department's controversial stop and frisk policy coming to Oakland, California? The NYPD came under fire for their policy of stopping and searching people who police deem suspicious. Civil rights groups say the practice, seen in this video from The Nation, unfairly targets innocent Black and Latino men. Well, this week, Oakland legislators approved a contract for former New York Police Commissioner William Bratton, a strong proponent of stop and frisk. Twitter users in Oakland and around the U.S. shared their thoughts with the hashtag #OakMeeting. J. Ron writes, Oakland's police will run out of tear gas and rubber bullets if they stop and frisk in Oakland. Well, we'll continue to follow both of those stories, so tweet us your thoughts using the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, our thanks to our guests Joy Chen and Ira Trivedi. We are going to continue our conversation with them and members of our Google Plus Hangout in our post show at stream.aljazeera.com. So if you're not already there, go there now. Now on Thursday's show, does the Obama administration have a double standard when it comes to leaks of classified information by government whistleblowers? Send us your thoughts and your questions on that. Until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Stream's online post show. We're going to pick up our conversation where we left off. We're talking about whether it's okay for women to hold off on marriage to pursue other goals, particularly in the two largest economies, largest growing economies in the world, China and India. Joy, you wrote a book about this, advising young Chinese women, and probably women, not bad advice for any woman around the globe. Don't get married until you're 30, right? What are some of the items of advice? What are some of the pieces of advice you give young women?
Well, the first half of the book has to do with making yourself Miss Right. How to find yourself, how to become happy as a woman, how to love yourself, how to create your own fantastic life. And then the second half of the book is how to use the latest global CEO headhunting techniques to headhunt the man of your dreams, because
you're a former headhunter.
I found that when I was 35 and became a global CEO headhunting, I could use those headhunting techniques, and I found my Mr. Right at age 38.
She wasn't stalking, though. It had nothing to do with stalking.
The last chapter has to do with loving and changing the world. So I think that, the goal is not to delay marriage forever. The goal is really to make sure that when you do get married, and if you get married, you'll have a happy and stable marriage. Right now, the divorce rate among people under age 30 in China is 57%.
Wow.
That's the divorce rate among the post-1980 generation, or the people who are from one-child families. So people are getting married very young and then getting divorced very young.
These ideas are very easy for any Westerner to hear and absorb and understand. But for a young woman who's grown up having it ingrained that things are a certain way and you've conformed to certain traditions and standards, this has got to be a little bit difficult to wrap your brain around and accept as an acceptable, viable option.
It's funny. When this book is quite out there from the standpoint of where Chinese society and culture is now externally. But you would be amazed at how many young women came up to me and said, the things that you wrote in the book are the things that were in my heart already. But the fact that you put them out in a book made it legitimate for me, made it okay for me to speak them out loud. So I think that, women are right there, but they just need to be told it's okay to have their own dreams, and it's okay to express them. And I think that that's really why my book became such a bestseller. Not necessarily that it's changed women from one direction to a completely different direction, but that just kind of legitimized a lot of what they were hoping, to be able to realize in their own lives already.
Ira, what's your experience been? You've got your book out. I know things are a little different on this topic in India than they are in China, but what's your advice to young women, Ben?
What Joy is saying actually sounds completely true for India too. And actually, when I study what's happening in China, what's happening in India, it's so similar. Yet we always compare India to the West. I think because there's such a big population of Indians in the West, so we always say, hey, we're all becoming more American, we're all becoming more, British. But the truth is that I think India and China are very, very similar. I think India is a little bit behind China. Maybe say about 7 to 10 years behind in sort of the progress of women and sort of the mentality. But it's very much, I think what Joy is saying is completely correct, for women here too. I think for Indian women at the moment, it's a very tumultuous ride, especially for young women, because at one point, they want to work. It's becoming more and more expensive to live in India, so they almost need to work now. It's not so easy anymore to just sort of survive on your husband's income. There's a lot of urbanization, there's migration. We've seen entire cities come up, in the past couple of years, villages turn to cities here in front of my eyes. And it's amazing the way the city is changing every single day. I live in Delhi and I notice this. And so I think this...
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. When you brought up the economic pressures and how expensive it is to live in India, I wonder how you see that coming to bear on the cultural pressures, because one thing that I've noticed, it's very expensive to live in the big cities in China, like in Beijing and Shanghai. Having an apartment is very, very expensive, and yet in 2000 there was a study that asked people whether they agree with the statement 男主外女之内, which is men's world is in the outside world, women's world is in the inside. And 62% of men and 55% of women agreed with this statement. And that proportion had actually risen in the previous 10 years, while women have been getting all this education and while the economic pressures have only been growing. So I do kind of worry that we are, on some level, seeing some kind of a backlash against women actually putting their education to use and doing something with it. And I wonder if we're seeing that kind of thing happening in India as well.
I do agree that there's, I'm not sure as much of a backlash as the things that have been ingrained in your mind, you know, since you were a little girl here, that marriage is so important. You must take care of your family and your kids come first before your career, and you must have a child before you're 30 years old. So I think these things are so ingrained in all of us that it's very difficult to sort of let go of that. But at the same time, the world is changing around you, you know, the things that the media is throwing at you. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about is how, you know, what the media is showing to young people around India and China as well, about, you know, really powerful women working, you know, being independent, having sex, falling in love, and all of these things that people want that. They aspire towards that. So, you know, young women all over the country aspire to live in the metro cities and have that life. So I do think that it is really an internal clash, you know, where you have all of these values that you've been brought up with, but then you see this very new world evolving around you, and you're very much part of it.
You know,
so
Ira, I was in India for a couple weeks in November and had a chance to talk to some young women about this. And one of the things that a lot of them said was there's such parental authority and parental control, and it becomes a major issue. Even when you get married, there was an expectation, at least among the women I was talking to, that they would live with their husband's family.
Yeah,
and they were saying to me, I want my own house, I want to make my own decisions, but I can't because I'm under this control, this parental authority.
Absolutely. I think the family remains the number one, you know, unit here. There is no real importance of individuality. So when you see this thing that, you know, this is what I want. The I in India is not. It's very invisible. You know, it's very much about the family even today. And you see any of the big Bollywood dramas, even and it's all about the family more. It's not so much about the couple. So many times you marry for your family. So when I see a lot of young men, in fact, and I speak to them, they said, you know, we want to marry a girl who fit into our families. That's the number one thing criteria. I think that actually has, there's some very economic reasons behind this, because I think in India today, the state systems are still not very strong. We don't have, for example, what China has. So if you fall sick, if you need money, you know, if you need to start a business, you still go to your family for support. So I think that, you know, until the state becomes stronger in a country like India, it's still, the family is still going to be the most binding unit here. And I think that is maybe where China's a little bit different, because you have such a strong state presence and, you know, such a strong case of social security.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the economics behind this. We just got a tweet from someone who says severe poverty forces families to commodify their daughters, short-term investment or long-term investment career. But I want to go to Shehla in our hangout for more, because I know she has a follow-up. Shehla, go ahead.
So yeah, actually there are too many ideas in here, but one that's really tragic is that young couples, they are forced to get married early. I mean, forced as in not forced literally, but forced because of social pressure, because of social obligations. They marry really early, and then after a while they realize, when they grow up and they live their lives, they realize that no, we weren't supposed to be married, or we weren't supposed to be together. And by that time, they already have kids. And then it's kids who suffer. So actually, I mean, in India, there needs to be this understanding that I have to get married when I feel like getting married. You know, not because I want to have kids, or not because there'll be a stigma attached to it. Because, I mean, there should be some solid motivation behind getting married. That seems to be missing. I mean, not completely, but yeah, still in some circles.
Charlene, did you want to jump in? Because I know you had similar thoughts you were telling our producers. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think considering one of the end goals of why people try to pressure women to get married in the first place is to get children, a lot of people forget that when you pressure people to get married and they're not ready, that these people, you know, they divorce and the children are affected. And I mean, because I also teach kids, you actually see how this affects the next generation as well.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point to bring up here, because right now in China, at least, we are seeing the very first generation in the history of this nation of children of divorce.
Right.
And,
Absolutely.
and so
same
all
here
of
in
this
India,
dogma.
it's incredible. The divorce rates here have, we don't have national figures for divorce, but in a city like Delhi, there was one divorce court a decade ago. Today there's about 17. They've had to have 17 new courts just to handle divorce here. Just same as Joy, like there's this entire first generation of people growing up with, for the first time with maybe divorced parents.
And
So
Joy, there's
all of
someone on
this
Twitter that
dogma-
just agrees with what you both just said. She says marrying for love seldom works. Just look at the divorce stats. So then what's the solution?
Well, I think it's really important for young women and young men to get to know themselves a little bit, go out, explore the world, have fun, don't spend all of their single years just sitting around worrying about getting a boyfriend or getting stressed out about being married. Go out and explore and create their own fantastic life, because actually when you're happy and a little mysterious, as I said in the book, is the best way to really attract a man who will really love you for who you are.
And to be the best you can be.
That's right. I was just on Chinese. I was on Chinese television recently, speaking with a very good-looking single 40-something male anchor guy who said, but in China, 40-something men just want 20-something women to worship them. And I think that there is a group in society that feels that way, but I think that as those 20-something women grow up a little bit, they'll want someone who's a real soulmate, and they deserve that.
All right, that's a perfect note to end the show on. Joy Chen, Ira Trivedi, and everyone in our Google Plus Hangout, thanks for joining us today. Now on Thursday's show, does the Obama administration have a double standard when it comes to leaking information, classified information, by government whistleblowers? Send us your thoughts on that. Until then, we'll see you online.